Beneath the cobblestones in the Vatican City, past the Swiss guards in their Renaissance uniforms, beyond the tourists snapping photos of St. Peter's Basilica, there exists a place where time itself seems to hold its breath. 53 miles of shelving stretch through climate-controlled vaults, holding 12 centuries of secrets. The Vatican Secret Archives contain documents that shaped empires, letters that toppled kingdoms, and manuscripts that challenge everything we thought we knew about history. For most of its existence, this repository remained sealed to the outside world. Secret, not in the sense of hidden, but in its original Latin meaning, private, belonging to the Pope alone. In 1881, Pope Leo XIII made a decision that would change everything. He opened portions of the archives to qualified researchers. But even today, with thousands of documents accessible, scholars estimate we've seen less than 1% of what lies within those vaults. What we have discovered reads like fiction, except every word is real. A letter from Michelangelo complaining about unpaid bills. The transcript of Galileo's heresy trial, complete with his forced recantation. A desperate plea from Mary, Queen of Scots, written days before her execution. These documents don't just record history. They are history, preserved in the very ink and parchment touched by the hands that shaped our world. Each page tells a story, but together they form something larger, a hidden chronicle of Western civilization itself. The archives hold correspondence in languages both living and dead. Latin mingles with ancient Greek, medieval Italian flows into Ottoman Turkish. There are documents written in code, others in scripts so obscure that only a handful of scholars can decipher them. Some texts arrived at the Vatican through conventional means: diplomatic pouches, church correspondence, administrative records. But others came through more mysterious channels: manuscripts rescued from burning libraries, documents smuggled out of countries on the brink of revolution, texts that someone, somewhere, decided must survive at any cost. To understand what lies within the Vatican Secret Archives, we must first understand what they are, and perhaps more importantly, what they are not. The name itself has spawned 1,000 conspiracy theories. Secret Archives conjures images of forbidden knowledge, of truths too dangerous for ordinary eyes. In 2019, Pope Francis attempted to dispel these myths by renaming them the Vatican Apostolic Archives. But old names die hard, especially when they've captured imaginations for centuries. The archives began, like many great institutions, from necessity rather than grand design. In the early centuries of Christianity, the Church had no central repository. Important documents were scattered across Rome, some in the Lateran Palace, others in various basilicas, many in the personal collections of cardinals and bishops. This haphazard system worked well enough when the Church's reach was limited. But as Christianity spread across Europe and beyond, the volume of correspondence exploded. Letters arrived from missionary outposts in Asia, from kings seeking papal approval, from scholars debating theological minutiae. The real transformation came in the 17th century. Pope Paul V, recognizing the chaos, ordered the creation of a unified archive. The year was 1612. Shakespeare was writing The Tempest, Galileo was observing Jupiter's moons, and the Vatican was building what would become the world's most extraordinary collection of historical documents. The physical space itself tells a story. Unlike the public grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica or the Sistine Chapel, the archives occupy a utilitarian bunker. Built adjacent to the Vatican Library, the structure prioritizes preservation over aesthetics. Temperature and humidity controls maintain a constant environment. 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 45% humidity. These numbers aren't arbitrary. Too warm, and ancient inks begin to fade. Too cold, and parchment becomes brittle. Too humid, and mold creeps across centuries-old vellum. Too dry, and pages crack at the slightest touch. The shelving system resembles a small city's infrastructure. Metal scaffolding rises from floor to ceiling, creating narrow corridors that researchers navigate like streets. Each shelf has an address, each document a precise location. The organizational system, refined over centuries, allows archivists to locate a single page among millions. But numbers alone cannot capture the archive's true scale. Those 53 miles of shelving hold approximately 85 kilometers of archival material. If you were to read 1 page per minute, working 8 hours a day without breaks, it would take over 4,000 years to read everything. The collection spans from the 8th century to the present day. The oldest surviving document is a fragment from 742 AD, a time when Charlemagne was still a child and Vikings had not yet begun their raids on European monasteries. Each document that enters the archives undergoes a meticulous process. First, authentication. Experts examine paper, ink, seals, and script to verify authenticity. Then, preservation. Damaged documents receive careful restoration, sometimes requiring months of delicate work. The restoration laboratory resembles a surgical theatre more than a library. Specialists work under magnification, using tools that wouldn't look out of place in a dentist's office. A single tear in a medieval manuscript might take days to repair properly. Japanese tissue paper, thinner than human skin, patches holes. Special adhesives, pH neutral and reversible, bind fragments together. Every intervention is documented. Future researchers must know what is original and what is restoration. The archivists themselves form an exclusive brotherhood. Only about 600 researchers receive permission to enter each year. Applications require academic credentials, specific research proposals, and often letters of recommendation from established scholars. Even approved researchers face restrictions. No bags, no pens, only pencils to prevent permanent marks on priceless documents. Photography requires special permission and often involves lengthy bureaucratic processes. The reading room itself enforces an atmosphere of monastic concentration. Silence is absolute. Researchers sit at assigned desks, documents delivered by white-gloved attendants. Each manuscript is treated like a patient in intensive care, handled minimally, monitored constantly. Security measures rival those of any intelligence agency. Multiple checkpoints control access. Surveillance cameras monitor every corner. Documents are tracked with a precision that would impress Amazon's logistics department. Yet for all these precautions, thefts have occurred. In 1996, an American scholar smuggled out pages from a 14th century manuscript. He was caught trying to sell them to a rare book dealer in Ohio. The incident led to even stricter protocols. Now researchers undergo searches both entering and leaving. The archive's contents divide into several categories. Official correspondence forms the backbone. Letters between popes and monarchs, diplomatic negotiations, administrative records. These documents shaped the political landscape of Europe for over a millennium. Then there are the registers, massive volumes recording every official act of the papacy. Appointments, dispensations, excommunications, all meticulously documented in Latin script so regular it seems printed rather than handwritten. The miscellaneous section defies easy categorization. Here lie documents that don't fit elsewhere. Personal letters, financial records, architectural plans, musical compositions. This chaotic collection often yields the most surprising discoveries. Special collections hold materials too precious or fragile for general access. The Archivum Arcis contains documents from the Castel Sant'Angelo, the fortress where popes once took refuge during times of crisis. These papers survived sieges, floods, and fires that destroyed countless other records. Language presents its own challenges. While Latin dominates, the archives contain documents in over 100 languages and dialects: medieval French, Byzantine Greek, classical Arabic, each requiring specialized knowledge to decipher. Some texts employ codes and ciphers. During the Renaissance, when mail could be intercepted by rivals, sensitive communications used elaborate encryption. The Vatican employed professional code breakers, mathematicians and linguists who spent their careers unraveling these puzzles. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect isn't what the archives contain. It's what they might contain that we haven't yet discovered. Among all the documents in the Vatican Secret Archives, few carry the weight of tragedy quite like the trial records of Galileo Galilei. The year was 1633, a time when the boundary between heresy and science blurred like stars through an unfocused telescope. The trial transcript runs to thousands of pages. Every word spoken in that Roman courtroom was recorded by notaries whose cramped handwriting fills page after page of now yellowed parchment. Reading these documents today feels like eavesdropping on a conversation that changed the course of human thought. Galileo was 69 years old when he faced the Inquisition. The man who had discovered Jupiter's moons, who had seen the phases of Venus through his handmade telescope, now stood accused of heresy for suggesting Earth moved around the sun. The documents reveal details that history books often omit. Galileo's health was failing. The transcript notes his requests for breaks, his complaints about arthritis that made writing painful. Yet his mind remained sharp as ever, parrying theological arguments with scientific observation. The prosecution's case rested on a technicality that seems almost absurd today. In 1616, Galileo had been warned not to hold, teach, or defend the heliocentric theory, the idea that Earth orbits the Sun. But the exact wording of this warning became a matter of dispute. The archives contain multiple versions of the 1616 injunction. One version, unsigned and unwitnessed, uses stronger language than the official record. This discrepancy has fueled centuries of speculation. Was the document forged to strengthen the case against Galileo? The interrogation records show Galileo's attempts to thread an impossible needle. He claimed his book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, merely presented both sides of the debate. But the prosecutors saw through this thin defense. The book clearly favored the Copernican model. What strikes modern readers is the sophistication of the theological arguments. The cardinals weren't ignorant of science. Many were educated men who understood mathematics and astronomy. Their objection wasn't to observation, but to interpretation. Cardinal Bellarmine, who had died before the trial, left behind letters now preserved in the archives. He had actually proposed a compromise: treat heliocentrism as a useful mathematical model rather than physical reality. This solution might have saved everyone considerable grief, but Galileo's personality made compromise difficult. The trial records reveal Galileo's character in unexpected ways. He could be arrogant, dismissive of critics, quick with sarcasm. In his dialogue, he had placed the Pope's arguments in the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. This insult to Urban VIII, who had once been Galileo's friend and supporter, proved politically fatal. The archives contain personal letters between Urban VIII and various cardinals discussing the trial. The Pope felt personally betrayed. He had defended Galileo in the past, had even written poems praising his discoveries. Now he saw the astronomer's book as a deliberate provocation. June 22nd, 1633, the Day of Judgment. The archives preserve the original sentencing document, complete with the signatures of the cardinal judges. Of the 10 cardinals assigned to the case, 3 refused to sign, a detail that suggests internal disagreement about the verdict. The sentence required Galileo to recant his beliefs publicly. The exact text of his abjuration survives, written in his own hand. I abjure, curse, and detest the aforesaid errors and heresies. Legend claims he muttered, E pur si muove, and yet it moves. But the contemporary records contain no such defiance. The aftermath is documented in excruciating detail. Galileo's sentence to prison was immediately commuted to house arrest. Letters from his villa in Arcetri describe his final years. Going blind, the death of his beloved daughter, Maria Celeste, continuing his research despite prohibition. The Vatican's file on Galileo didn't close with his death in 1642. The archives contain centuries of subsequent documents, debates about lifting the ban on his works, discussions about the Church's position on science, gradual acknowledgements of error. In 1744, over a century after the trial, the Church finally authorized publication of Galileo's complete works. The archives contain the internal deliberations, careful theological arguments about why this reversal didn't undermine papal authority. Pope John Paul II's 1992 acknowledgement that the Church erred in condemning Galileo generated its own archive. The preparatory documents reveal years of careful study, theologians, historians, and scientists working to craft a statement that admitted error without undermining doctrine. But the Galileo files contain more than just trial records. There are letters between Galileo and his daughter, a nun who took the name Maria Celeste. Her letters, filled with concern for her father's health and reputation, provide intimate glimpses of family life amid cosmic controversy. Financial records show the cost of Galileo's house arrest, payments to guards, expenses for his maintenance, even receipts for the special foods required by his medical conditions. History's grand narrative comes down to mundane details. The price of bread for a prisoner who changed our understanding of the universe. The scientific correspondence in the archives reveals Galileo's network of supporters. Letters from astronomers across Europe, many writing in code to avoid church censure, show how scientific truth spread despite official suppression. These documents map the underground circulation of forbidden ideas. Perhaps most poignant are Galileo's own research notes, submitted as evidence, sketches of lunar craters, observations of Saturn's rings, calculations of planetary orbits, all presented to judges more concerned with theological implications than celestial mechanics. The preservation of these documents itself tells a story. Someone decided these papers mattered enough to save them. Through wars, floods, and political upheavals, archivists protected the record of the Church's most controversial trial. Modern technology has revealed secrets invisible to earlier researchers. Multispectral imaging has uncovered text that had faded beyond visible recognition. Marginalia, previously illegible, now reveals the thoughts of readers across centuries, some defending Galileo, others condemning him, all grappling with the implications of his ideas. The Galileo affair remains sensitive even today. When researchers request these documents, they often face additional scrutiny. The Church understands that every new examination might reveal details that reshape the narrative once again. Yet the complete opening of these files demonstrates something profound about institutional memory. By preserving even the records of its mistakes, the Vatican created an opportunity for eventual reconciliation with truth, even if that reconciliation took 3.5 centuries. In a climate-controlled vault, wrapped in acid-free paper, lies a letter that makes historians' hands tremble when they hold it. Written on parchment so fine you can see through it, marked with a seal that once commanded armies, the letter bears the signature of Genghis Khan's grandson, Mongke Khan, ruler of an empire that stretched from Poland to the Pacific. The year was 1253 AD. Europe trembled before the Mongol advance. Cities from Kiev to Krakow lay in ruins. Refugees brought tales of an unstoppable horde that moved like a plague across the land, leaving nothing but bones and ashes in its wake. Pope Innocent IV, desperate for intelligence about this threat from the east, had dispatched a Franciscan friar named William of Rubruck to the Mongol court. The archives contain not just Mongke Khan's response, but William's complete report, a document that reads like a medieval thriller. William's journey took 2 years. His account, preserved in multiple copies, describes crossing frozen rivers wide as seas, traversing grasslands where the horizon seemed to curve with the earth itself. He writes of eating fermented mare's milk until his stomach rebelled, of learning to sleep in the saddle, of watching his European certainties dissolve like morning frost. When William finally reached Karakoram, the Mongol capital, what he found challenged every assumption. The city hosted Nestorian Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, even Taoist monks, all practicing their faiths under Mongol protection. The Khan's court included Chinese engineers, Persian astronomers, Russian craftsmen, and now a Franciscan friar from France. Mongke Khan's letter to the Pope, translated from Mongolian through Persian into Latin, makes no concessions to diplomatic niceties. The Khan declares himself ruler by the power of the eternal God over all peoples from sunrise to sunset. He demands submission, not negotiation, not alliance, but complete surrender. The original letter employed a script that few in Rome could read. The Vatican archives contain multiple translation attempts, each slightly different, as scholars struggled to convey concepts that had no equivalent in Latin. The Mongol notion of universal rule under heaven's mandate didn't fit neatly into European categories of kingdom and empire. But the archives hold more than just this famous exchange. There are dozens of letters from the Mongol period, desperate pleas from Polish bishops, strategic assessments from Hungarian nobles, eyewitness accounts from merchants who had seen the destruction firsthand. One document, water-damaged but still legible, contains a report from a Dominican friar who witnessed the siege of Kiev in 1240. He describes Mongol siege engines that launched not just stones, but incendiary devices. Ceramic pots that burst into flames that water could not quench. This early description of what might have been Greek fire or proto-gunpowder weapons provides crucial evidence of technology transfer along the Silk Road. The correspondence reveals the Vatican's intelligence network in action. Letters from missionaries in Central Asia arrived through merchant caravans, their messages sometimes taking years to reach Rome. These documents were often written in code, biblical references concealing military intelligence, seemingly innocent discussions of weather actually reporting troop movements. The Mongol letters challenged more than European military power. They challenged the medieval worldview itself. Here was an empire that didn't fit the traditional narrative of Christian versus Muslim. The Mongols were neither, yet they ruled both. Later correspondence shows evolving strategies. By the 1260s, the Vatican was attempting to play different Mongol factions against each other. Letters to the Ilkhanate in Persia proposed alliances against the Muslim Mamluks. Communications with the Golden Horde in Russia took a different tone, attempting to convert them to Christianity. The archives contain a fascinating document from 1287, a letter from Arghun Khan of the Ilkhanate proposing a joint Mongol Christian crusade to recapture Jerusalem. The letter, written in Mongolian with a French translation, offered to provide 200,000 horsemen for the campaign. The Pope's response, carefully drafted over months of deliberation, shows medieval diplomacy at its most complex. He had to balance enthusiasm for reclaiming the Holy Land against fear of empowering a potentially greater threat. The final letter employs such elaborate courtesy that its actual message, essentially maybe later, almost disappears in the rhetoric. These documents also preserve linguistic treasures. The Mongol letters include words and phrases in languages now extinct. Marginal notes by medieval translators provide invaluable data about how languages evolved and influenced each other across the Eurasian continent. One particularly intriguing file contains reports about Prester John, the legendary Christian king supposedly ruling somewhere in Asia. The Vatican took these reports seriously enough to send multiple expeditions searching for this potential ally. The correspondence shows how myth and intelligence became dangerously intertwined in medieval geopolitics. The Mongol letters also document early biological warfare. A report from Kaffa in 1347 describes the Mongols catapulting plague-infected corpses over city walls. This document may record the very incident that brought the Black Death to Europe, a pandemic that would kill a third of the continent's population. The preservation methods for these documents reflect their perceived importance. The most significant letters were copied multiple times, distributed to different archives for safekeeping. Some bear notes from successive librarians across centuries, each adding their understanding of the text's significance. Modern analysis has revealed hidden layers in these documents. Chemical testing of the ink reveals trade routes, Persian ink in Rome, Chinese pigments in Mongol letters, European materials in documents from Karakorum. Each document is an artifact of cultural exchange, not just in words, but in its very material composition. The Vatican's Mongol correspondence ends abruptly in the late 14th century. The empire had fragmented, the threat had passed, Europe's attention turned to its own internal conflicts. But these letters remain, testimony to a moment when the known world suddenly became much larger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Tucked away in a section of the archives that researchers approach with particular fascination lies the correspondence of the Borgia family, a collection that reads like the plot of a particularly dark Renaissance drama, except every word is historically verified. Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, left behind thousands of documents during his pontificate from 1492 to 1503. These papers reveal not the caricature of corruption that popular history presents, but something more complex, a man navigating the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics with skill that impressed even his enemies. The archives contain the original papal bulls that divided the New World between Spain and Portugal. The Inter Caetera of 1493, written just months after Columbus returned from his first voyage, draws an imaginary line through the Atlantic Ocean. Everything west would belong to Spain, everything east to Portugal. With a few strokes of a pen, Alexander VI reshaped the destiny of continents he had never seen. But it's the personal correspondence that truly captivates researchers. Letters between Alexander and his daughter Lucrezia Borgia reveal a devoted father, not the monster of legend. When she was sent to Ferrara for her third marriage, his letters show genuine concern for her happiness and health. One letter, dated 1502, discusses her difficult pregnancy in surprisingly tender terms. Alexander writes about sending her personal physician from Rome, includes advice about diet and rest, even mentions praying daily for her safe delivery. This is not the voice of a corrupt libertine, but of a worried grandfather-to-be. Cesare Borgia's correspondence tells a different story. The archives contain his military dispatches from the Romagna campaign, documents that Machiavelli himself studied when writing The Prince. These letters reveal strategic brilliance mixed with casual brutality. One dispatch describes the siege of Faenza in clinical detail. Cesare calculates the exact amount of gunpowder needed to breach walls of specific thickness, discusses the psychological impact of executing captured officers, debates whether terror or mercy would more quickly secure surrender. His tone remains businesslike, even when discussing actions that would horrify modern readers. The financial records paint their own picture. The Borgias didn't merely steal from the church. They revolutionized its finances. Alexander VI created new positions specifically to sell them, established a primitive bond market using future papal revenues as collateral, even experimented with what modern economists would recognize as derivative instruments. The archives contain a ledger showing the sale of cardinalships. The going rate in 1500 was approximately 25,000 ducats, equivalent to millions in today's currency. The ledger lists buyers like items in an auction catalogue, complete with payment terms and interest rates for those who paid in installments. But perhaps the most intriguing documents concern the alleged poisonings. The Borgias were accused of eliminating rivals with a poison called cantarella. The archives contain several documents that might support these claims, or might prove them false. A letter from the papal physician describes treating Cardinal Orsini for sudden illness in 1503. The symptoms, violent stomach cramps, bleeding from the gums, delirium, match what we now know about arsenic poisoning. But they also match several natural diseases common in Renaissance Rome. More damning is a coded message found in Cesare's papers. When deciphered, it discusses preparing the wine for our friend's farewell dinner. The friend was Cardinal Michiel, who died suddenly after dining with Cesare. Coincidence or murder? The archives preserve the evidence but not the certainty. Alexander VI's death generated its own documentary trail. The official account describes a fever, probably malaria, but private letters between cardinals tell different stories. Some claim poisoning, others divine judgment, still others suggest syphilis. The master of ceremonies, Johannes Burchard, kept a detailed diary now preserved in the archives. His entry for Alexander's death describes the body turning black and swelling so badly it barely fit in the coffin. These symptoms suggest poisoning, or simply the effects of Roman summer heat on an unembalmed corpse. The archives also preserve the propaganda war that followed Alexander's death. Pamphlets, letters, and sermons competed to blacken or rehabilitate his memory. Julius II, his successor and enemy, commissioned documents portraying the Borgias as devil worshippers. These accusations, preserved alongside defense briefs from Borgia supporters, show how history gets written by the winners. Lucrezia's later correspondence, after her father and brother's deaths, reveals a different woman than legend suggests. As Duchess of Ferrara, she patronized artists, administered justice, managed complex diplomatic negotiations. Her letters discuss Ariosto's poetry, not poison. They debate theology with Reformed Franciscans, not methods of murder. One particularly moving document is her will, drafted in 1519 as she lay dying from childbirth complications. She makes provision for her children, bequeaths money to convents and hospitals, asks for masses to be said for her father's soul. Even facing death, she defended Alexander's memory. The Borgia archives include unexpected treasures. There's a letter from Leonardo da Vinci to Cesare Borgia, discussing plans for draining marshes in the Romagna. Sketches accompany the text, Leonardo's own drawings of hydraulic systems that wouldn't be built for centuries. Financial documents reveal the Borgia's patronage of arts, payments to Pinturicchio for frescoes in the Borgia apartments, contracts with goldsmiths for papal regalia, even receipts for costumes used in elaborate Vatican ceremonies. The same family accused of every vice also commissioned some of the Renaissance's greatest art. The coded correspondence deserves special mention. The Borgias employed several cipher systems, some not fully decoded until the 20th century. These documents discuss everything from military strategy to family gossip, all hidden behind numerical substitutions and symbolic keys. One decoded letter from Cesare to his father discusses the French disease, syphilis, that was ravaging his army. He requests physicians who know the new mercury treatment, complains about soldiers deserting rather than facing the cure, which was often worse than the disease. Modern forensic analysis of these documents continues to yield surprises. DNA testing of blood spots on certain letters has confirmed familial relationships and disproven some of the more salacious rumors about Borgia family dynamics. The Borgia documents force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about Renaissance Italy. The same culture that produced Michelangelo and Raphael also accepted assassination as a political tool. The archives preserve both sides of this contradiction without judgment, leaving posterity to draw its own conclusions. Deep within the archives, wrapped in specially treated silk to prevent deterioration, lie documents bearing the seal of the Knights Templar, parchments that chronicle the destruction of medieval Europe's most powerful military order. The centerpiece of this collection is the Chinon Parchment, lost for centuries in the Vatican's labyrinthine filing system until its rediscovery in 2001. Measuring roughly 700 by 500 millimeters, bearing the seals of 3 cardinals, this document contains the papal absolution of the Templar leadership, proof that Pope Clement V knew the charges against them were false. The year was 1307, on Friday, October 13th, a date that would become synonymous with bad luck. King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of every Templar in his kingdom. The archives contain the original arrest orders. Written in urgent script, sealed with royal wax, they accused the knights of heresy, sodomy, idol worship, and spitting on the cross. The charges were so outrageous that many officials initially refused to believe them. But Philip had prepared carefully. The archives preserve his correspondence with papal officials in the months before the arrests. He plants seeds of doubt, mentions disturbing rumors, requests guidance about how to handle potential heresy within a religious order. Reading these letters in sequence reveals a masterclass in political manipulation. The interrogation records make for disturbing reading. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, initially confessed under torture. The transcript notes when hot irons were applied, when bones were broken, when the questioning resumed after the prisoner lost consciousness. Medieval justice had no prohibition against coerced confession. But then something unexpected happened. De Molay recanted. Standing before papal commissioners, he declared his confession false, the charges fabricated, the order innocent. The archives contain multiple witness accounts of this dramatic reversal. The Chinon Parchment reveals what happened next. 3 cardinals, sent secretly by Clement V, interrogated de Molay and other Templar leaders in the castle of Chinon. Away from Philip's torturers, the knights told a different story. Yes, they admitted, new initiates were sometimes told to spit near a cross, not on it, but near it, as a test of obedience. This bizarre hazing ritual, borrowed from military traditions, had been twisted into evidence of heresy. The cardinals granted absolution. The Pope had his evidence of innocence. But Philip IV had the knights, and more importantly, he had their wealth. The archives contain desperate letters from Clement V, trying to save the order while avoiding direct confrontation with the French crown. Financial documents in the collection reveal why Philip was so determined. The French crown owed the Templars enormous sums, loans for wars, crusades, and royal extravagance. Destroying the order eliminated the debt and transferred their assets to the crown. The Templar banking records, preserved in remarkable detail, show an operation of stunning sophistication. Letters of credit that could be redeemed from London to Jerusalem, complex interest calculations, even primitive insurance policies for merchant ventures. The Knights had created the medieval equivalent of international banking. Property deeds fill several volumes. The Templars owned thousands of estates across Europe, farms, vineyards, mills, even entire villages. Each property generated income that funded their military operations in the Holy Land. The dissolution documents track the systematic dismantling of this empire. Properties transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, at least officially. Marginal notes in different hands reveal how much actually ended up in royal coffers. Personal effects of arrested knights were catalogued with bureaucratic precision. Swords, armor, books, even clothing, all listed, valued, and redistributed. One inventory describes the contents of the Paris temple, including religious relics the knights claim to have brought from Jerusalem. Letters from Templars who escaped arrest provide different perspectives. Some fled to Scotland, others to Portugal, where they reformed as the Order of Christ. Their correspondence describes watching brothers burn at the stake, properties seized, a way of life destroyed in mere months. The trial transcripts from other countries tell varying stories. In England, where torture was illegal, most Templars were acquitted. In Aragon, they actually took up arms to defend themselves. In Germany, local princes protected them from arrest. But in France, the persecution was relentless. The archives contain witness testimonies from the burning of Jacques de Molay in 1314. As flames consumed him on an island in the Seine, he supposedly cursed Philip IV and Clement V, calling them to meet him before God's tribunal within a year. Both king and pope died within months. Philip from a stroke while hunting, Clement from an agonizing illness. The archives contain contemporary accounts attributing these deaths to de Molay's curse, though modern readers might see coincidence where medieval minds saw divine justice. Perhaps most fascinating are documents relating to Templar knowledge and practices. Building plans for commanderies show sophisticated understanding of architecture and engineering. Medical texts describe surgical procedures advanced for their time. Navigation charts suggest the Knights knew more about Atlantic routes than previously thought. One manuscript, partially burned but still readable, contains what appears to be a Templar ritual book. The ceremonies described are Christian, but incorporate elements that seem almost Masonic. Secret passwords, symbolic objects, initiation rites involving symbolic death and rebirth. Financial codes used by the Templars appear throughout their correspondence. Some remain unbroken, numerical sequences that might represent transactions or might hide completely different information. Cryptographers still work on these puzzles 7 centuries later. The Vatican's Templar documents include several papal bulls never enforced. Clement V drafted orders to restore the Templars, to return their property, to punish false accusers. These documents, prepared but never sent, show a pope trapped between conscience and political reality. Letters from the Knights Hospitaller, who inherited much Templar property, reveal an unexpected epilogue. They complain about the burden of maintaining Templar estates, the debts that came with the assets, the difficulty of managing such vast holdings. The windfall Philip IV expected never fully materialized. Modern analysis of these documents continues to reveal new insights. Chemical testing of ink and parchment helps date documents precisely. Multispectral imaging reveals text that was deliberately erased or written over. Each technique adds another piece to the puzzle of the Templars' destruction. Among the most emotionally charged documents in the Vatican Secret Archives is a letter written by a queen awaiting execution. Mary Stuart's final message to Pope Sixtus V, penned just hours before she walked to the scaffold at Fotheringhay Castle. February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, had been Elizabeth I's prisoner for 19 years. The letter, written in French with a hand that trembled only slightly despite the circumstances, begins with a dignity that makes the reader's breath catch. Most Holy Father, I am about to die for my faith. The opening line sets the tone for everything that follows. Not a plea for rescue, not a protest of innocence, but a statement of acceptance wrapped in defiance. The archives contain not just this final letter, but years of correspondence leading to this moment. Secret messages smuggled from various English prisons, written in cipher, hidden in book bindings, sometimes written in invisible ink made from lemon juice. Each document adds another layer to the tragedy of a queen who spent nearly half her life in captivity. The Babington plot letters are here, the correspondence that sealed Mary's fate. Anthony Babington and his conspirators planned to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. Mary's encrypted approval, decoded by Elizabeth's spymaster Francis Walsingham, provided the evidence needed for her execution. But the Vatican files suggest a more complex story. Letters from papal nuncios describe Walsingham's methods, how he intercepted Mary's correspondence, had it copied, then forwarded it with additions that made her seem more guilty than she was. The technique, called projection by intelligence services today, turned ambiguous approval into explicit conspiracy. Mary's letters to various Catholic monarchs paint a picture of increasing desperation. To Philip II of Spain, she offers to make him her heir if he will rescue her. To the Duke of Guise, her French cousin, she describes the dampness of her rooms, the pain in her joints, the gradual crushing of hope. Medical reports in the archives detail her declining health. Rheumatism so severe she could barely walk. Digestive problems that left her unable to eat solid food for weeks. Depression that manifested in physical symptoms no physician could cure. Yet her mind remained sharp. Every letter shows a woman thinking 3 moves ahead in a game she was destined to lose. The correspondence with her son, James VI of Scotland, is particularly heartbreaking. She hadn't seen him since he was 10 months old. Her letters attempt to maintain a maternal connection across decades of separation. She sends him advice about kingship, warns him about treacherous advisors, reminds him of his Catholic heritage. James's responses, when they came at all, were formal and cold. The archives contain drafts of letters he never sent, warmer messages his Protestant advisors convinced him to suppress. He was playing his own game, one that would eventually unite the English and Scottish crowns. The trial records, copied and sent to Rome, reveal legal proceedings that were theatre more than justice. Mary was denied legal counsel, not allowed to see the evidence against her, forbidden from calling witnesses in her defence. She defended herself in English, her 4th language, with an eloquence that impressed even her judges. "I am a sovereign queen," she declared, "answerable to none but God." The transcript notes that several commissioners shifted uncomfortably at this reminder of the precedent they were setting, trying and executing an anointed monarch. Letters between Vatican officials discuss the theological implications. Could a Protestant queen legally try a Catholic queen? Did Mary's forced abdication of the Scottish throne remove her sovereign immunity? These weren't abstract questions. They would shape international law for centuries. The execution warrant, a copy of which rests in the Vatican files, bears Elizabeth I's signature, but correspondence reveals her agonizing over the decision. She signed it, then tried to recall it, then blamed her secretary for sending it. Even Elizabeth understood she was crossing a line from which there was no return. Mary's final night is documented through multiple sources. Her physician's notes describe her calm demeanor, her refusal of sedatives, her insistence on wearing red, the Catholic color of martyrdom, beneath her black execution gown. She spent hours writing final letters. To her brother-in-law, Henri III of France, she forgave him for not securing her release. To her servants, she left detailed instructions about distributing her few remaining possessions. Each letter was witnessed and sealed. She knew they would become historical documents. The letter to the Pope stands apart from the others. Here she drops the political maneuvering, the carefully coded language, the diplomatic niceties. She writes as a Catholic facing death, seeking not earthly intervention, but spiritual comfort. She describes her imprisonment as a test of faith she's grateful to have endured. She asks for prayers for her soul, for her son's conversion to Catholicism, for the English Catholics who would suffer after her death. She forgives her enemies, even Elizabeth, though she doesn't name her directly. Witness accounts of the execution, collected by papal agents, provide devastating detail. The scaffold built in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay, draped in black, Mary entering with such dignity that even hostile observers were moved. her voice steady as she prayed in Latin, while the Protestant dean tried to drown her out with English prayers. The executioner's account, preserved in the archives, describes what official records omit, how he begged her forgiveness, standard practice, and she replied, "I forgive you with all my heart, for now, I hope, you shall make an end of all my troubles." The first blow failed to sever her neck completely. The axeman struck again. Still, sinew connected head to body. He had to use the axe like a saw to finish the job, a horrific detail that spread across Europe within weeks. When the executioner lifted Mary's head, her auburn hair came off in his hand. It was a wig. Beneath, her real hair was grey and cropped short. Prison had aged her beyond her 44 years. The Vatican's collection includes reactions from across Catholic Europe. Philip II of Spain used Mary's death to justify launching the Armada. The Pope declared her a martyr, though stopped short of formal canonization. French Catholics called for war against England. But perhaps the most intriguing documents are those that arrived years later. Deathbed confessions from English officials involved in the trial, expressing regret. A letter from one of the commissioners admitting they knew the evidence was fabricated. Even Walsingham's private papers, acquired by Vatican agents, suggesting he felt guilt about his role. The aftermath documents trace Mary's transformation from political prisoner to Catholic icon. Pilgrims began visiting Fotheringhay almost immediately. Relics supposedly stained with her blood appeared across Europe. Miracles were attributed to her intercession. James VI's correspondence with the Vatican after becoming James I of England reveals his complex feelings about his mother's death. He quietly had her body moved to Westminster Abbey, arranged for masses to be said for her soul, even commissioned a magnificent tomb. But publicly, he maintained the Protestant line that her execution was justified. The Vatican files on Mary Stuart don't end with her death. They continue through centuries of debate about her legacy. Was she a martyr or a murderer? A victim of political persecution or a willing participant in plots against Elizabeth? The documents don't provide easy answers. They show a woman of contradictions, devout yet political, romantic yet calculating, a queen who never stopped believing in her divine right, even as earthly power slipped away. Not all treasures in the Vatican Secret Archives involve grand historical events. Some of the most captivating documents reveal the mundane frustrations of genius, like Michelangelo Buonarroti's stream of complaint letters about painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The correspondence begins in 1508, when Pope Julius II commissioned what would become one of art history's greatest achievements. But reading Michelangelo's letters, you'd think he was being asked to perform the labors of Hercules. "I am not a painter," he writes in one early letter. This from the man who had already created masterpieces in fresco. But Michelangelo considered himself a sculptor first. Painting was beneath his dignity, or so he claimed. The financial records tell their own story of frustration. Michelangelo was promised 3,000 ducats for the ceiling. The archives contain his increasingly angry demands for payment, letters that progress from polite reminders to barely contained rage. "I have not received a penny in 13 months, reads one missive from 1509. "My assistants threaten to leave. The plasterers refuse to work without payment. I am using my own money to buy pigments." The Pope's responses, when preserved, show a man equally frustrated. Julius II was financing wars, rebuilding St. Peter's, managing the Papal States. To him, one artist's complaints seemed trivial compared to the fate of Christendom. But the most fascinating letters detail the physical agony of the work. Michelangelo developed what modern doctors would recognize as severe cervical strain from looking upward for hours. He describes paint dripping into his eyes, his feet swelling from standing, his back forming a bow like a Syrian arch. One letter includes a sardonic poem about his suffering. "My stomach's pushed by force beneath my chin. My beard points skyward. I feel my brain upon my back." The man painting God giving life to Adam felt like he was dying in the process. Technical documents in the archives reveal the innovations Michelangelo developed. Recipe for a special plaster that would resist Rome's humidity. Designs for scaffolding that allowed work to continue while services proceeded below. color formulations that would maintain their vibrancy despite candle smoke. The correspondence with pigment suppliers reads like a masterclass in Renaissance chemistry. Ultramarine from Afghanistan, worth more than gold. Cinnabar from Spain for the perfect red. Complaints about suppliers trying to pass off inferior materials. This blue is no better than mud, he writes about one batch. Letters to his family reveal personal struggles alongside professional ones. His father constantly asking for money. His brothers pursuing failed business ventures with his earnings. Michelangelo supporting them all while living like a pauper himself, eating stale bread and cheap wine. The archives contain receipts for his household expenses during the Sistine project. They show a man of almost pathological frugality, reusing candles until they were stubs, wearing the same clothes until they fell apart, sleeping in the chapel to save lodging costs. Disputes with assistants fill several folders. Michelangelo fired his entire team early in the project, claiming they were incompetent. Their letters tell a different story, of a perfectionist impossible to please, who would destroy a day's work over a barely visible flaw. The Vatican records include contracts with new assistants, each more detailed than the last, specific duties outlined, penalties for mistakes enumerated, clauses about maintaining secrets of technique. Michelangelo trusted no one with his methods. Medical records describe treatments for his various ailments, kidney stones that left him writhing in agony, eye infections from the plaster dust, a mysterious fever that nearly killed him in 1510, forcing a months-long break in the work. During this illness, Pope Julius visited him, an extraordinary honor documented in court records. The Pope allegedly threatened to have Michelangelo thrown from the scaffolding if he didn't recover and finish the ceiling. Whether this was motivation or black humor remains unclear. The archives preserve Michelangelo's preparatory sketches, submitted for papal approval. The original design was much simpler, 12 apostles and decorative patterns. How it evolved into over 300 figures depicting the entire story of creation is documented through a series of negotiations. Julius II wanted grandeur. Michelangelo wanted artistic freedom. Their correspondence shows two titanic personalities clashing and ultimately creating something neither initially envisioned. Letters from visitors describe the work in progress. Cardinals complaining about the nudity. Theologians debating the biblical accuracy of certain scenes. Foreign ambassadors marveling at the ambition of the project. One letter from the Venetian ambassador provides a vivid snapshot. The artist works like a man possessed, speaking to no one, eating while standing on the scaffolding, sometimes sleeping there rather than descending. The moment of unveiling is documented in multiple accounts. October 31st, 1512, All Saints' Eve. The chapel was packed with dignitaries expecting to see a competent decoration. What they witnessed instead left them speechless. The papal master of ceremonies wrote, "When the scaffolding came down and the ceiling was revealed complete, the chapel fell silent, as if the breath had been pulled from every lung." But even triumph couldn't stop Michelangelo's complaints. Letters immediately after the unveiling demand final payment, criticize the lighting, worry about humidity damage. He seemed incapable of simply accepting praise. Financial disputes continued for years. The archives contain legal documents from 1513, with Michelangelo still trying to collect money owed. Julius II had died, and his successor, Leo X, felt no obligation to pay his predecessor's debts promptly. Later correspondence shows Michelangelo's evolving relationship with his masterpiece. Initially, he refused to even look at it. Years later, he would sneak into the chapel at night to study what he'd created, trying to understand how he'd achieved certain effects. When he was commissioned to paint the Last Judgment on the altar wall 25 years later, his letters show a different man, still complaining, still demanding payment, but now aware he was adding to something transcendent. The archives include his response to criticism about the nudity in the Last Judgment. When the papal master of ceremonies called it more suitable for a bathhouse than a chapel, Michelangelo painted him into the fresco, as Minos, judge of the damned, with donkey ears and a snake biting his genitals. Conservation reports from across the centuries track the ceiling's deterioration and restoration. Candle smoke, incense, humidity, all taking their toll on the plaster. each generation of conservators adding their own correspondence to the archive, continuing a conversation Michelangelo started. The most recent addition to the file dates from the 1980s restoration. Scientists discovered that Michelangelo's colors were far brighter than anyone imagined. Centuries of grime had muted his palette. The cleaned ceiling revealed an artist who used color as boldly as he complained. Filed under Propaganda Fide, the Vatican Department for Spreading the Faith, lies one of the most fascinating cultural conflicts in church history. The Chinese rites controversy documents span over 2 centuries, chronicling a collision between European Christianity and Chinese civilization that would shape global missionary work forever. The story begins with a letter dated 1582 from Matteo Ricci, an Italian Jesuit who had just entered China, written in Latin with occasional Chinese characters carefully drawn in the margins. It describes a civilization that defied every European assumption. These people possess a moral philosophy of such sophistication, Ricci writes, that Aristotle himself would sit as a student at their feet. This was heretical thinking, suggesting pagans could achieve wisdom without Christian revelation. Ricci's strategy was radical adaptation. He dressed as a Confucian scholar, learned classical Chinese, studied ancient texts. His letters describe years of patient work, not preaching on street corners, but engaging in philosophical dialogue with the literati. The archives contain his Chinese writings, submitted to Rome for approval. He translated God as Tianzhu, Lord of Heaven, arguing this connected with existing Chinese concepts of divine order. He found parallels between Christian ethics and Confucian morality, suggesting Chinese sages had received natural revelation. Most controversially, Ricci permitted Chinese Christian converts to continue honoring ancestors and Confucius. These weren't religious acts, he argued, but civil ceremonies, like Europeans honoring dead kings or philosophers. His reports describe the ancestor veneration rituals in detail, offerings of food and incense at family altars, bowing before tablets inscribed with ancestors' names, seasonal ceremonies maintaining connection between living and dead. To Ricci, prohibiting these practices would make Christianity impossible for Chinese to accept. Family loyalty was the foundation of Chinese society. Asking converts to abandon ancestor veneration was like asking them to cease being Chinese. The Jesuits' success was remarkable. By 1610, they had converted members of the imperial court. The archives contain letters from Chinese Christians, written in elegant calligraphy, discussing theological questions with surprising sophistication. But then the Dominicans and Franciscans arrived. Their letters to Rome paint a shocking picture. Christians bowing before pagan altars, offering incense to dead ancestors, participating in ceremonies honoring Confucius. This wasn't Christianity, they argued, but dangerous syncretism. The Dominican Juan Bautista de Morales wrote a scathing report in 1643. The Jesuits have created not Christians, but confused pagans who think they can serve both Christ and Confucius. The debate exploded across thousands of pages. Theological arguments dissecting the nature of worship versus veneration, linguistic analyses of Chinese terms for divine beings, anthropological studies of Chinese customs. The Jesuits submitted testimonies from Chinese scholars explaining their practices. One document, beautifully preserved, comes from a Confucian philosopher named Xu Guangqi, who had converted to Christianity. He writes, "We honor ancestors not as gods, but as the roots from which we grow. To forget them would be to become rootless trees, soon to fall." The Vatican was caught in an impossible position: allow the Chinese rites and risk compromising core Christian doctrine, prohibit them and likely lose China to Christianity forever. The archives contain drafts of multiple papal decisions, revised and reconsidered. Pope Alexander VII initially sided with the Jesuits in 1656. Innocent XI seemed to favor the Dominicans. The church wavered, unable to decide. Meanwhile, the Chinese Emperor Kangxi had become involved. The archives contain an extraordinary document, an imperial edict in Chinese with Latin translation, granting tolerance to Christianity. Kangxi writes that he has examined Christian doctrine and found it good and beneficial to society. but he insists that honoring ancestors and Confucius are civil duties, not religious practices. The emperor even sent a delegation to Rome. The archives preserve their travel documents, diplomatic credentials, and a letter from Kangxi to the Pope suggesting they could resolve this as reasonable men. But in 1704, Pope Clement XI made a fateful decision. The decree Cum Deus Optimus condemned the Chinese rites. Christians could not participate in ceremonies honoring Confucius or ancestors. The word for God must be Tianzhu, not traditional Chinese terms. The papal legate Charles Thomas Maillard de Tournon was sent to deliver this decision to the emperor. His reports, written during house arrest in Macau, describe the catastrophic meeting. Kangxi was furious. "The Pope understands nothing of China," he declared. "How dare he presume to tell us our own customs are religious when we say they are not?" The emperor's edict of 1721 expelled missionaries who wouldn't follow Ricci's accommodations. The archives contain desperate letters from Jesuits watching their life's work crumble. Churches closed, converts forced to choose between Christianity and Chinese identity. One Jesuit writes, "We have lost an empire of souls for the sake of theological precision that the Chinese neither understand nor accept." The aftermath documents are heartbreaking. Letters from Chinese Christians begging for compromise. Reports of families torn apart when some members remained Christian while others returned to traditional practices. Secret correspondence from underground Christians shows how some tried to maintain faith while appearing to conform. They developed codes, hidden symbols, ways to honor Christ while seeming to venerate ancestors. The persecution that followed is documented in brutal detail. The Emperor Yongzheng, Kangxi's successor, viewed Christianity as inherently subversive. Missionaries were executed, converts forced to apostatize, churches destroyed. But the debate didn't end. For 2 centuries, the archives accumulated arguments for reversal. Missionaries from India, Japan, and Africa pointed out similar accommodation issues in their territories. Finally, in 1939, Pope Pius XII reversed the prohibition. The decree Plain Compertum acknowledged that ancestor veneration and Confucian ceremonies were indeed civil, not religious. Ricci had been right all along. But it was too late. China had been lost to Christianity. The Communist Revolution would soon make missionary work impossible anyway. The Chinese rites documents offer a profound lesson in cultural misunderstanding. They show how European inability to conceive of non-religious civic ritual cost the Church its greatest missionary opportunity. Modern scholars studying these documents find eerie parallels to contemporary debates about enculturation. How much can Christianity adapt to local culture without losing its essence? The question Ricci raised 4 centuries ago remains unanswered. Among the more recent acquisitions in the Vatican Secret Archives is a collection that arrived under extraordinary circumstances. Documents seized by Napoleon Bonaparte when he kidnapped Pope Pius VII, later returned after the emperor's fall. The story begins with a letter dated 1796 from a young General Bonaparte to the Directory in Paris. Fresh from victories in Italy, he discusses not military strategy, but theological politics. "The Pope has more influence over men's minds than any army," he writes. "We must use this power, not destroy it." This pragmatic approach to religion would define Napoleon's complex relationship with the Vatican. The archives contain hundreds of documents from their negotiations, a diplomatic dance between an atheist who understood faith's political value and a pope trying to preserve his church through revolutionary chaos. The Concordat of 1801 took 15 months to negotiate. Draft after draft fills the archives, each covered in corrections, additions, deletions. Napoleon's margin notes reveal his thinking. "Too much power to Rome," scrawled next to one clause. "Acceptable if we control appointments," beside another. Cardinal Consalvi, the Pope's negotiator, kept detailed notes of his meetings with Napoleon. He describes the first consul's tactics: explosive anger followed by charm, threats alternating with promises, brilliant insights mixed with deliberate misunderstandings. "He argues like a Jesuit while claiming to despise them," Consalvi writes. "He knows church law better than many canonists." yet professes complete indifference to religion. The final Concordat was a masterpiece of ambiguity. Catholicism would be recognized as the religion of the great majority of French citizens, not the state religion, but not merely one among equals. The government would nominate bishops, but the Pope would consecrate them. Secret articles, not published at the time but preserved in the archives, reveal additional compromises. The Church would not seek return of confiscated property. Priests would swear loyalty to the government. The revolutionary calendar would be quietly abandoned. But the relationship soured when Napoleon decided he needed papal blessing for his imperial ambitions. The correspondence about the coronation of 1804 shows escalating tension. Napoleon wanted the Pope to come to Paris, an unprecedented demand. No Pope had left Italy to crown a ruler since medieval times. The symbolism was clear. The Emperor was making the Pope come to him, not vice versa. Pius VII's private letters reveal his anguish. He knew it was humiliation, but refusing might mean persecution of French Catholics. Cardinal advisors were split. Some urged defiance, others counseled that saving the Church required temporary submission. The Pope's travel diary to Paris makes fascinating reading. Crowds gathered everywhere to see him. Many French had never seen a Pope. Even anti-clerical revolutionaries knelt for his blessing. Napoleon watched this popular devotion with concern. The coronation itself produced one of history's great power plays. At the crucial moment, Napoleon took the crown from Pius VII's hands and placed it on his own head. The message was unmistakable. He was emperor by his own will, not papal authority. The Pope's account, written that evening, maintains diplomatic restraint, but private letters to cardinals express fury at this choreographed humiliation. "I was reduced to a prop in his theatre," he writes. Relations deteriorated further when Napoleon demanded papal support for his continental system against Britain. The archives contain increasingly threatening letters from the emperor. "You are sovereign of Rome only through Charlemagne," he writes, "and I am Charlemagne's successor." Pius VII's response shows unexpected steel. Charlemagne never presumed to make the Pope his vassal. The crisis exploded in 1809. French troops occupied Rome. The Papal States were annexed to the French Empire. When Pius VII excommunicated everyone involved, Napoleon ordered his arrest. The kidnapping documents make dramatic reading. General Radet's report describes breaking into the papal apartments at night. The Pope, dressed in white robes, refused to change into travel clothes. "I will go as Pope or not at all," he declared. The journey to France was deliberately harsh. No stops in major cities where crowds might gather. Traveling at night to avoid attention. The 67-year-old Pope, already in poor health, nearly died during the Alpine crossing. For 5 years, Pius VII was Napoleon's prisoner, first at Savona, then at Fontainebleau. The archives contain his secret correspondence, smuggled out through sympathetic guards and servants. These letters reveal a man maintaining papal authority from captivity. He appointed bishops, issued spiritual guidance, even conducted church business, all while Napoleon tried to force him to abdicate, or at least move the papacy to France. Napoleon's letters to his prisoner alternate between rage and cajolery, one day threatening to have him declared insane and replaced, the next offering to restore the Papal States if he would cooperate. The Fontainebleau Concordat of 1813 seemed like Napoleon's victory. The exhausted Pope, isolated and ill, signed an agreement accepting French dominance, but within days he retracted his signature, declaring it invalid because signed under duress. Napoleon's fury is captured in a letter to his minister. "The Pope has more courage than all my marshals combined." As Napoleon's empire crumbled, the Pope's captivity became a liability. Catholic regions were restive. Even non-Catholic powers condemned the imprisonment. In January 1814, with Allied armies approaching, Napoleon ordered Pius VII's release. The Pope's return to Rome was triumphant. The archives contain accounts from every city he passed through. Massive crowds, bells ringing, former revolutionaries begging forgiveness. But the most remarkable document is Pius VII's letter after Napoleon's first abdication. When the fallen emperor's family faced persecution, the Pope offered them refuge in Rome. He even wrote to the Allied powers requesting humane treatment for Napoleon. He caused the Church great suffering, Pius writes, but vengeance belongs to God alone. Napoleon's response from Elba shows genuine surprise. The Pope is the only sovereign who has shown me Christian charity. During the 100 Days, when Napoleon briefly returned to power, he made no move against the Church. Letters suggest he even considered full reconciliation, though Waterloo ended such possibilities. From St. Helena, Napoleon dictated memoirs discussing his relationship with the Pope. These documents, acquired by the Vatican after his death, show grudging respect. Pius VII never broke, he admitted. In this, he proved stronger than I. The Vatican archives were only partially returned after Napoleon's fall. Many documents were lost, sold as scrap paper, destroyed in transport, or simply vanished. Scholars estimate tons of irreplaceable material disappeared forever. Yet what survived tells an extraordinary story, not just of political conflict, but of two exceptional men, one who conquered Europe through force of arms, another who resisted through force of faith. Beyond the political intrigue and religious controversy, the Vatican Secret Archives hold a treasure trove of scientific documents that challenge our assumptions about the Church's relationship with knowledge. Here, among theological treatises and papal bulls, lie the works of medieval astronomers, Renaissance mathematicians, and natural philosophers who wore cassocks while pushing the boundaries of human understanding. One of the most remarkable collections belongs to Nicholas of Cusa, the 15th century cardinal who proposed that Earth was not the center of the universe, a century before Copernicus. His manuscript, De Docta Ignorantia, contains mathematical proofs and astronomical observations that wouldn't be fully appreciated for generations. Nicholas writes about infinite worlds, the relativity of motion, even something resembling the modern concept of inertia. His margin notes show a mind grappling with ideas that wouldn't have names for centuries, calculus-like concepts, non-Euclidean geometry, the mathematical nature of physical reality. The archives contain correspondence between Vatican astronomers and Islamic scholars during the medieval period. These letters, written in Arabic with Latin translations, discuss lunar observations, eclipse predictions, improvements to astronomical tables. The Church was quietly learning from Muslim science while publicly calling for crusades. Roger Bacon's encrypted notebooks fill several shelves. This 13th century Franciscan friar wrote in code about experiments the Church might have condemned, optical devices that could see great distances, machines that could fly, powder that could explode with tremendous force. His letter to Pope Clement IV describes these wonders in careful language. These are not magic, but natural philosophy, he insists. God's creation contains secrets that patient observation and mathematics can unlock. The Pope's response, preserved alongside Bacon's letter, is surprisingly supportive. He funded Bacon's research, though quietly. Too much enthusiasm for natural philosophy might upset conservative cardinals. Medical manuscripts reveal the Vatican's role in preserving ancient knowledge. Translations of Galen and Hippocrates, copied by monks who added their own observations in the margins. Anatomical drawings that shouldn't exist. Dissection was officially forbidden, yet these images show detailed understanding of human anatomy. One document from 1302 describes a secret dispensation allowing medical students at the University of Bologna to dissect executed criminals. The Church publicly condemned the practice while privately recognizing its necessity for medical advancement. The botanical collections are equally impressive. Missionaries sent specimens and descriptions from every continent. The archives contain pressed flowers from the Amazon, seed packets from China, detailed drawings of medicinal plants from Africa. These weren't just curiosities. Vatican botanists were experimenting with crop cultivation, seeking plants that could alleviate famines. Letters discuss importing potatoes from the New World, crossbreeding wheat varieties, techniques for preserving food. The Gregorian calendar reform of 1582 generated thousands of pages of calculations. Astronomers and mathematicians from across Europe contributed observations and corrections. The archives show this wasn't just religious timekeeping, but serious scientific work. Christopher Clavius, the Jesuit mathematician who led the reform, left notebooks filled with calculations. His work on the calendar required understanding of celestial mechanics that rivaled contemporary astronomers. He corresponded with Galileo, Kepler, and Tycho Brahe, exchanges that show mutual respect despite theological differences. The archives contain early seismographic records from Jesuit missions. These priests were systematically recording earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis centuries before modern seismology. Their observations, compiled and analyzed in Rome, represent one of the first attempts at global scientific data collection. Maps in the collection reveal geographical knowledge that officially shouldn't have existed. A 1507 map shows the Pacific Ocean, 6 years before Balboa supposedly discovered it. Antarctic coastlines appear on charts decades before the continent's official discovery. These anomalies might represent knowledge from ancient sources the Vatican preserved. Or perhaps the Church had information from explorers whose voyages were never publicly acknowledged. The archives don't provide definitive answers, only tantalizing hints. Alchemical texts occupy a controversial section. Officially, the Church condemned alchemy as diabolic. Yet here are detailed procedures for chemical processes, discussions of atomic theory centuries before Dalton, experiments in transmutation that read like early nuclear physics. Pope John XXII's own laboratory notes from the 14th century describe experiments with mercury and sulfur. Was he seeking the philosopher's stone or conducting early chemistry? His encrypted formulas remain largely unbroken. The Vatican Observatory's historical records chronicle systematic skywatching spanning centuries. Comet sightings, supernova observations, detailed maps of lunar craters. This data has proven invaluable to modern astronomers studying long-term celestial changes. Letters from Jesuit missionaries in China describe learning advanced mathematics from Chinese scholars. They sent back texts on algebra and geometry that influenced European mathematics. The archives show knowledge flowing both ways, a global exchange of scientific ideas coordinated through Rome. Geological specimens accompany many missionary reports. Rocks, minerals, fossils, each carefully labeled with location and local beliefs about their properties. These collections help develop early theories about Earth's age and formation. The archives contain correspondence about fossils that challenged biblical chronology. How could there be seashells on mountaintops if the world was only 6,000 years old? Internal debates show theologians and scientists within the Church struggling to reconcile evidence with doctrine. Weather records from monasteries across Europe provide climate data spanning a millennium. Harvest dates, first frosts, unusual storms, all meticulously recorded by monks who saw patterns in God's creation. Modern climate scientists use these records to understand historical weather patterns. Mathematical treatises show surprising sophistication, solutions to cubic equations predating published methods, probability theory developed by clerics studying games of chance, ostensibly to condemn gambling but actually advancing mathematics. The archives preserve Leonardo Fibonacci's correspondence with Vatican scholars. His famous sequence appears in discussions about divine proportion in nature, rabbits breeding, flower petals, spiral shells, all following mathematical patterns that suggested God as the supreme mathematician. Acoustic studies from cathedral builders reveal understanding of sound waves centuries before their formal discovery. Documents describe placing resonant cavities in walls, calculating reverberation times, designing spaces where whispers could travel across vast halls. The Vatican's collection of automatons and mechanical devices challenges assumptions about medieval technology. Blueprints for clockwork angels that moved their wings, mechanical monks that walked and prayed, even a silver lion that could walk across a room. These weren't just toys. Letters discuss using mechanical principles to understand divine creation. If humans could create moving figures, what did this say about God's animation of living beings? Perhaps most intriguing are documents suggesting the Church investigated phenomena we would now call paranormal, not with superstition, but systematic observation. Reports of stigmata include medical examinations, chemical analysis of blood, testimonies from skeptical witnesses. The archives show the Vatican as an unexpected catalyst for scientific revolution. preserving, translating, and transmitting knowledge across centuries and continents. Even when science challenged doctrine, someone in the hierarchy ensured the evidence survived. In a specially secured section of the archives, accessible only to the Pope and select cardinals, rests one of the most controversial documents of the 20th century, the Third Secret of Fatima. For decades, its contents fueled speculation, conspiracy theories, and fierce theological debate. The story begins with 3 shepherd children in Portugal, 1917. Lucia Santos and her cousins Francisco and Jacinta Marto claimed the Virgin Mary appeared to them monthly from May to October. The archives contain the original reports, written by local clergy trying to make sense of events that would transform a rural hillside into one of Catholicism's most important pilgrimage sites. The initial ecclesiastical investigation shows deep skepticism. Father Manuel Ferreira's notes describe simple children, possibly delusional, certainly seeking attention. The local bishop ordered silence, hoping the matter would fade. But then came October 13th, 1917, the miracle of the sun. The archives preserve hundreds of witness testimonies, from believers and skeptics alike. 70,000 people claim to see the sun dance in the sky, change colors, plummet toward Earth. Newspaper accounts from secular publications couldn't explain what happened. O Século, Portugal's most anti-clerical newspaper, ran the headline, "Extraordinary phenomenon witnessed by thousands." Their reporter, sent to debunk the miracle, became a witness instead. The secrets themselves were revealed gradually. Lucia, the only visionary to survive to adulthood, became a nun and recorded what Mary had told them. The first 2 secrets, released in 1941, seemed prophetic in hindsight. A vision of hell and a prediction that World War I would end, but a worse war would begin if humanity didn't repent. The second secret specifically mentioned Russia spreading errors throughout the world. Written in 1917, before the October Revolution, this seemed to predict Soviet communism's rise. The archives show how this apparent prophecy convinced many skeptics, including Pope Pius XII. But it was the third secret that captured imaginations. Lucia wrote it down in 1944, sealed it in an envelope with instructions not to open it before 1960. She said the Virgin told her it would be clearer then. The envelope arrived at the Vatican in 1957. The archives contain the receipt, signed by Pope Pius XII's secretary. Multiple witnesses confirmed the Pope read it, turned pale, and returned it to its envelope without comment. When 1960 arrived, the world waited. Pope John XXIII read the secret, consulted with cardinals, and decided not to release it. The Vatican statement was brief. The content does not concern our time. This decision triggered decades of speculation. What could be so troubling that successive popes refused to reveal it? Theories ranged from nuclear war to apostasy within the Church to the date of the world's end. The archives contain thousands of letters from the faithful demanding disclosure. Some claimed their own visions revealing the secret's contents. Others threatened to leave the Church if transparency wasn't provided. Internal Vatican correspondence shows intense debate. Cardinal Ottaviani argued for revelation, saying secrecy fueled dangerous speculation. Cardinal Bea counseled continued silence, fearing the content might be misinterpreted. Pope Paul VI's private notes, discovered after his death, reveal he read the secret in 1965. His diary entry is cryptic. The martyrdom described is both specific and symbolic. Publication now would cause more harm than healing. Then came May 13th, 1981. Pope John Paul II was shot in St. Peter's Square, on the anniversary of the first Fatima apparition. He survived, attributing his life to Mary's intervention. The assassination attempt changed everything. John Paul II requested the third secret be brought to him in the hospital. After reading it, he reportedly said, "It is clear now. This was about me." The archives contain the Pope's correspondence with Sister Lucia. Their letters, in Portuguese with Italian translations, discuss interpretations of the secret. Lucia confirmed the assassination attempt was connected, but suggested the secret's meaning was broader. In 2000, John Paul II decided to release the third secret. The archives preserve drafts of the announcement, each carefully worded to provide context and prevent panic. Cardinal Ratzinger, future Pope Benedict XVI, wrote a theological commentary to accompany the revelation. The secret described a vision, a bishop in white, understood to be the Pope, climbing a mountain covered with corpses, then being killed by soldiers. Angels gathered the martyr's blood to water souls approaching God. Public reaction was mixed. Some felt vindicated that the secret concerned papal assassination. Others insisted this couldn't be all. Surely something was being hidden. The archives reveal that skepticism wasn't entirely unfounded. Multiple versions of Lucia's text exist, with slight variations. Were these drafts, or did she write different accounts at different times? Cardinal Capovilla, who served John XXIII, left a sealed testimony opened after his death. He claimed there was an attachment to the third secret, additional words from Mary that explained the vision. This attachment, if it exists, has never been released. Sister Lucia's personal papers, transferred to the archives after her death in 2005, add complexity. She wrote multiple interpretations of the visions over decades. Some emphasize personal conversion, others warn of apostasy within the Church. Still others speak of global catastrophe. Forensic analysis of the documents raises questions. The handwriting in some texts attributed to Lucia shows variations that suggest different authors or different periods of composition. The ink chemistry indicates some documents dated to the 1940s were written later. The Vatican's response to ongoing conspiracy theories fills multiple files. Official statements insist everything has been revealed, yet internal memos show continued concern about Fatimist groups who reject the official interpretation. Recent additions to the archive include scientific studies of the 1917 solar phenomenon. Atmospheric physicists propose natural explanations, atmospheric optical effects, mass hallucination, retinal afterimages from staring at the sun, yet none fully account for all reported observations. The Fatima files continue growing. Each pope adds his own interpretation. Each generation of faithful sees new meaning in the messages. The secrets may have been revealed, but their significance remains contested. Beneath the spiritual authority and artistic treasures, the Vatican Secret Archives document another reality: centuries of financial operations that funded crusades, built basilicas, and occasionally brought the Church to the brink of bankruptcy. The modern scandal begins with a leather-bound ledger from 1942. Entered in precise handwriting are deposits from Croatian sources during World War II. Gold coins, jewelry, foreign currency. No questions about origin, no names of original owners. These deposits connect to the rat lines, escape routes for Nazi war criminals fleeing to South America. The archives contain correspondence between Vatican officials and Bishop Alois Hudal, who openly assisted fleeing Nazis. Hudal's letters justify his actions with twisted theology. These men fought against godless communism, he writes. Whatever their excesses, they deserve Christian mercy. Financial records show Vatican accounts received substantial deposits coinciding with the arrival of certain refugees. Money that likely came from looted Jewish property funded charitable works across South America. The moral complications are staggering. But financial controversy wasn't new to the Vatican. The archives preserve the complete records of the Medici Bank's relationship with the papacy. For 2 centuries, this partnership shaped European finance. Letters between Cosimo de' Medici and Pope Eugene IV reveal how spiritual and financial power intertwined. The Pope needed loans for wars against rivals. The Medicis needed papal approval to charge interest, technically usury, forbidden by church law. Creative solutions emerged. Interest became gifts, or compensation for risk. Complex financial instruments disguised loans as currency exchanges. The archives show medieval bankers invented derivatives to circumvent religious law. The sale of indulgences, the spark that ignited the Protestant Reformation, is documented in excruciating detail. Price lists for different sins, commission rates for sellers, territorial franchises for the most profitable regions. Johann Tetzel's sales reports from Germany read like modern marketing documents. He tracked conversion rates, tested different sales pitches, calculated the optimal price points for maximum revenue. His famous slogan, "When a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs," was focus group tested in different markets. The construction of St. Peter's Basilica nearly bankrupted the church. Financial records show increasingly desperate measures to fund the project. New taxes on clergy, forced loans from Catholic monarchs, the creation of venal offices solely to sell them. Pope Leo X's personal expenses didn't help. The archives contain his household accounts, exotic animals for his private zoo, elaborate theatrical performances, banquets that cost more than parishes collected in a year. The Vatican Bank's modern incarnation began in 1942 as the Institute for the Works of Religion. Its founding documents emphasize opacity, no external audits, no published accounts, answerable only to the Pope. This secrecy enabled noble purposes and criminal ones. The bank funded anti-communist movements in Eastern Europe, supported Catholic education in mission territories. It also laundered money for the mafia, facilitated tax evasion for wealthy Italians, and invested in companies manufacturing contraceptives while publicly condemning birth control. The Ambrosiano scandal of 1982 nearly destroyed the Vatican's financial credibility. Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. His bank had collapsed with over $1 billion in debt, much of it from fake loans to Vatican-controlled shell companies. The archives contain Calvi's desperate final letters. He begged Pope John Paul II for protection, claimed he was being framed, threatened to reveal everything if abandoned. His death, suicide or murder, remains unsolved. Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, head of the Vatican Bank during the scandal, left behind encrypted files. Partially decoded, they reveal connections between Vatican finances, the CIA, and Poland's Solidarity movement. American intelligence money flowed through Vatican accounts to fund resistance against communist rule. This wasn't the first time Vatican finances served geopolitical purposes. Documents from the 1960s show secret payments to Italian politicians to prevent communist electoral victories. The Church was fighting the Cold War with cash as much as prayer. Recent reforms under Pope Francis have revealed more historical financial irregularities. Real estate holdings worth billions never appeared on official books. Donations meant for the poor were invested in luxury London property. Cardinals lived in apartments that generated rental income going to personal accounts. The archives show this isn't just corruption, but systemic dysfunction. For centuries, the Church operated without modern accounting. Different departments kept separate books, often in different currencies, with no central oversight. Peter's Pence, the annual collection for papal charity, provides a case study. Documents show most donations never reached the poor. They covered Vatican deficits, funded administrative costs, maintained properties. Internal audits, never meant for public viewing, paint a picture of financial chaos. Departments spending money that didn't exist, investments in companies that violated Catholic teaching, pension funds raided to cover operating expenses. Yet the archives also document genuine charity on a massive scale. Receipts for food shipments during famines, funding for hospitals in war zones, ransom payments for kidnapped missionaries. The same institution capable of breathtaking corruption also performed countless acts of mercy. Perhaps most revealing are documents about Vatican wealth during World War II. As Rome faced occupation, officials hid treasures in sealed chambers. Inventories list gold chalices, gem-encrusted crosses, ancient coins, wealth that could have fed thousands, hidden while Romans starved. The moral ambiguity permeates every page. Should the Church have sold its treasures to feed the poor, or preserved them as humanity's cultural heritage? The archives provide evidence but no easy answers. The Vatican Secret Archives stretch on. 53 miles of shelving, 12 centuries of secrets, millions of documents we've barely begun to explore. We've walked through just a handful of chambers in this vast labyrinth of memory. Each document we've encountered tells a human story. Behind the Latin phrases and papal seals are people wrestling with the same questions that plague us today. How to balance faith and reason, power and mercy, tradition and change. Galileo staring through his telescope, seeing moons that shouldn't exist according to doctrine. Mary Stuart writing her final letter, finding dignity in the shadow of the executioner's axe. Michelangelo complaining about his aching back while painting paradise on a ceiling. These aren't just historical figures frozen in time. Through their letters, reports, and confessions, they speak across centuries. Their doubts, ambitions, and failures feel startlingly contemporary. The archives themselves are a paradox, an institution dedicated to eternal truth, preserving evidence of constant change. Documents that prove the Church's mistakes kept safe by the Church itself. Secrets maintained for centuries, then suddenly revealed when the time seems right, or when pressure becomes unbearable. What we've seen represents perhaps 1% of what lies within those climate-controlled vaults. Thousands of documents remain classified. Others are so fragile that current technology can't safely access them. Still others are written in languages or codes that no living person can decipher. Future technologies will reveal new secrets. Multispectral imaging will uncover text hidden beneath centuries of grime. Artificial intelligence will break codes that have resisted human cryptographers. DNA analysis will solve mysteries of authorship and authenticity. But some mysteries may never be solved. Did Cesare Borgia really poison his enemies? What additional words did Mary speak at Fatima? How much did the Vatican know about the Holocaust while it was happening? The archives don't just preserve the past, they shape the present. Every papal decision references precedents found in these documents. Modern Catholics grapple with questions their predecessors faced and documented centuries ago. In an age of digital ephemera, where emails disappear and websites vanish, the Vatican's commitment to preservation seems almost miraculous. Every document deemed important enough to enter the archives will outlast the people who created it by centuries. This is perhaps the archive's greatest revelation. Not any individual secret, but the continuity itself. Through plagues and wars, reformations and revolutions, someone always ensured these documents survived. The monk who saved Galileo's notebooks from flood, the archivist who hid treasures from Napoleon's troops, the librarian who protected Jewish records during World War II, anonymous guardians of memory, understanding that destroying the past, even its uncomfortable parts, impoverishes the future. Remember that opening image? Those 53 miles of shelving stretching through climate-controlled vaults beneath Vatican City. Now you know they contain more than just documents. They hold humanity's arguments with itself, our struggles between faith and reason, authority and conscience, tradition and progress. Every document is a voice from the past, warning or encouraging, teaching or misleading, but always, always human. The secret archives aren't really secret anymore. They're private, personal, particular. They belong to an institution, but speak to everyone. They document power's corruptions and faith's transcendence, human failure and divine aspiration. Somewhere in those vaults, a document written today will rest beside parchments from the Dark Ages. Future scholars will study our concerns with the same fascination we bring to medieval mysteries. They'll wonder what we chose to preserve, what we decided to hide, what truths we couldn't bear to face. The archives endure, accumulating secrets like geological strata. Each generation adds its layer, confessions and conspiracies, saints and sinners, revelation and concealment. And perhaps that's the ultimate secret of the Vatican Secret Archives. They prove that nothing stays hidden forever. Time transforms secrets into history, scandal into scholarship, mystery into memory. The documents wait patiently in their controlled environment, neither judging nor absolving, simply preserving the evidence of what we were and what we might become.